Welcome to the Massachusetts School of Law Educational Forum. Thank you for joining us. This program is brought to you by the Massachusetts School of Law and is shown nationwide. On last month's program, we took a look at the NHL. How will it survive the combination of labor and financial problems? And what about the fact that too many people find it boring because it's low scoring and hard to follow on television? To help answer these questions, we assembled a panel of experts such as Derek Sanderson, who feels that the regular fan is getting priced out of the ability to see a game live.
If I can't take my two boys to the game, and they can't see the Bruins and Joe Thornton and Glenn Murray and these guys out there hustling, right, and say, hey, wow, Dad, that's great, and they go home, without costing me $320.
$500, that's what's going to cost you.
Well, I'm going to go cheap up the top. It's going to cost me a program, parking. It's going to, for four. I'm going to take my wife. And, yeah, it's up there. Yeah. And now that's after-tax dollars. Right. So the corporations buy it, and then the buildings are half full. Yeah. And the television gets out to the people, and okay, fine, they watch the game on the TV. But that isn't going to give you that guaranteed fan.
Mike Milbury, the general manager of the New York Islanders and a former Boston Bruin player, he thinks the owners and the players need to agree that for the NHL to survive, they must become partners.
In the days of the 60s, 50s, 60s, and 70s, really, I think ownership took advantage of players. Mm-hmm. I think there was a real one-way street, and it was not going the players' way. As the union changed, as times changed, the union became much more powerful, much more in tune, and the pendulum swung the other way. Now it's the players that are in control. And consequently, there's a lack of trust between the two parties, and we'll say something and they'll sneer, and they'll say something and we'll say, can you believe they don't understand it? Until we get to some sort of understanding of each other's difficulties and the fact that this is a business that requires obviously players, and obviously the capital and the input of ownership, and that we're a partnership, we're in for a rocky road.
Russ Conway, a Hall of Fame hockey writer, and the reporter who forever changed the landscape of hockey with his investigative reporting on Alan Eagleson, agrees that owners and players need to be partners, but that the big issue for the NHL is the fact that, in comparison to other professional sports, they don't receive the financial assistance from a major television contract.
If you look at NASCAR, I mean, NASCAR got $2.8 billion for its television commitment for the course of 5 years. That pays the purses that those drivers go at each different track, basically takes care of the whole purse. In the NHL, the TV revenue in Canada and the United States, it doesn't come close. I believe the last contract, they were taking in between the U.S. and Canada $720 million over 5 years. And of course, you know, local TV pays separately the clubs, but the TV revenue doesn't come close.
In part 2 of our look at the NHL, we will get the chance to see what Ken Hodge, a former NHL player, thinks about the league's future. Joining Ken will be Ken Lakin, a lawyer and a professor at MSL, who teaches sports and entertainment law. We will then sit down with Jack Falla, who wrote for Sports Illustrated, The Hockey News, and has written several books about his love of hockey. To close out our panel of experts, we traveled to the Fleet Center to speak with Dick Johnson, the curator of the New England Sports Museum. But let's start off today's show with Russ Conway of the Lawrence Eagle Tribune as we continue to get his thoughts about the NHL today. We tend to think of hockey as a violent or an aggressive sport, so I have a couple of questions. First question is the violence and the fighting essential to the game? Do the fans really want to see it?
I cringe every time people say it's violent. To the best of my knowledge, the last bench-clearing brawl in the National Hockey League that I remember was in 1989. If you watch a Major League Baseball season, how many are there? I mean, you know, 20, 25 a season. The NBA, they have these bench-clearing brawls all the time, even in the NFL. I don't find it violent. It's a contact sport. Mm-hmm. And whenever you have two people going 25 to 30 mile an hour, and they crash into each other.
Is that how fast they go, Russ?
Sometimes
Wow.
20, 28 miles an hour on skates you could reach. And you have a little disc, a rubber disc that you're winging 95 miles an hour. Some players can wing it up to 100 miles an hour. I mean, some people are going to get hurt. It's not for the sissies, that's for sure.
Are hockey players, in your opinion, becoming too greedy at the expense of the league? Are they in it for just themselves and not considering the longevity of the league?
I don't think all players are like that. By the same token, all owners aren't like that either. You must remember, a player is offered X amount of dollars. And I'll use Bill Guerin as an example that played here in Boston. The owner of the Dallas Stars offered him a 5-year contract for $45 million. Now, what would you do? He'd be a fool not to sign that, to take it. That was a guaranteed contract. He took care of his family, his grandkids, his own kids, his grandkids, and whatever generations there are to come. The owners in some areas have been their own worst enemies. And a new CBA is going to have to consider that. I mean, I don't think they trust themselves sometimes.
What about revenue sharing? The NHL does not do a good job with that, in light of the fact that you've got somewhere around 2/3 of the teams that are losing money. What can we do to have a better equity?
They have a slight revenue sharing program, but you've got to lose X amount of dollars for the Canadian teams, and that was because of the dollar, the US dollar versus the Canadian dollar. The exchange rates were just out of sight for a long while, and all NHL players have paid in US dollars. Well, it's pretty difficult for the Calgary Flames or the Vancouver Canucks, Toronto, Montreal, etc., to compete when they're paying their payroll in US dollars, but their income is derived in Canadian dollars.
Sure.
It's amazing some of them held on. Ottawa was in big trouble for a while. But should they revenue share? I think that's going to be on the table. I think at the end of the day, if they really want to look at it positively for the sport, for the fan, for the player, for the owner, the owners are entitled to make a profit. I mean, they have an investment.
Sure.
That's why they're in the business.
Right.
The players are entitled, the good ones, are entitled to be paid good professional sports money. But in order to bring those two together, you've got to look and say, are we going to be partners? Because you must remember, they do not have the television contract that the other three major league sports have.
Yes, that's exactly what I wanted to ask you. They don't have the TV, the merchandising, the other sponsorship revenue that all the other sports have.
TV is the big issue.
Yeah.
TV, for example, in the NFL, basically pays the payroll, the player's salary payroll.
Right.
If you look at NASCAR, I mean,
Oh,
NASCAR got
yeah.
$2.8 billion for its television commitment for the course of 5 years. That pays the purses that those drivers go at each different track, basically takes care of the whole purse. In the NHL, the TV revenue in Canada and the United States doesn't come close. I believe the last contract, they were taking in between the US and Canada $720 million over 5 years. And of course, local TV pays separately the clubs, but the TV revenue doesn't come close. Now, their merchandising and marketing has been really well done. It's $1 billion business. The NHL and their teams have done a great job. They've come up with revenue sources that they never had before, but they had to.
Sure they do.
To exist. I think at the end of the day, they've got to say, what is the value of a franchise? The value of the franchise is, for example, would there be a Fleet Center if the Boston Bruins didn't play there?
Sure. The answer is
No.
no, right?
And you've got to go further than just the hockey rink to see what the hockey team is responsible for in terms of revenue.
Right.
I think that's going to be the position of the Players Association. I don't think some of the owners are going to like that.
And the answer no longer can be to raise ticket prices because, I mean, I think we're at...
It's tapped out.
Yeah, exactly.
Pretty much tapped out, other than maybe cost of living or whatever. Boston takes a bad knock for that. Harrison has done a pretty good job putting a cap on tickets the best they can. It used to be, not long ago, that ticket revenue paid the salaries of the players. I know for a fact it hasn't done that with the Bruins for the last 3 or 4 seasons. And pretty much every dollar that's spent by a fan ends up going back into salary. So you're about tapped out. You can't keep jacking the ticket prices.
Last question. Tell us about your book. Tell us about your investigative work.
Well, the Eagle Tribune and its publisher at the time, Irving Rogers Jr., and editors were totally supportive. I had a number of players come to me with various suspicions, various complaints, both current and past players, of where their international hockey money was going, about their pensions. They had questions, they couldn't get answers. And basically, Eagleson wouldn't service them. He'd shut you out, browbeat you, and we went after it. Had total support. We did 8 different series in the Eagle Tribune. I had a number of publishing companies come to me, asked to do a book. We conducted that investigation. The FBI got involved, Justice Department, the Mounties, and it became an international event, so to speak, that certainly took a lot of patience and a lot of support. It was no one person, but it was quite an experience to go through. I said during the saga, and finally went to jail, went to prison, I said, you know, I hope there's some life left after this thing's over. And justice was served. 1,343 players got pension money back. Eagleson was fined. He was exposed. He was kicked out of the Hockey Hall of Fame, so to speak. He resigned because he had to under pressure. He was kicked out of the Order of Canada. And people in Canada, certainly around the sport, know that he was a fraud and he was a crook. And we were able to uncover it.
Well, you know, terrific job. You've heard that a million times, I know, but as I prepare for the show and I'm talking with various people, everybody is so grateful to you.
Well, I appreciate that.
Okay. Thank you so much for being here with us today. Your experience, your insight is invaluable. Thanks so much.
Thanks for having me.
Okay.
Dear Abby, I'm scared. I think my mom is showing signs of Alzheimer's disease. What should I do? Signed, Frightened. Dear Frightened, when my mom first began showing signs of memory loss, I was scared too. So I called the Alzheimer's Association for help. I'm Dear Abby. If you or someone you love is experiencing memory loss, take my advice. Contact the Alzheimer's Association. They help families like ours.
Crohn's disease and ulcerative colitis affect 1 million Americans by attacking their digestive system. Our son Marvin is one of them. As a mother, I know the devastating pain and suffering these diseases can cause. The Crohn's and Colitis Foundation of America is searching for the cure and empowering patients through education and support.
For a free booklet, contact us at ccfa.org.
Help us cure Crohn's and colitis.
Hi, Jeff. No, I'm still at the train station. I just almost got killed. Yeah, about 10 minutes ago. I'm still shaking. When I got off the 940 and Jill called. Yeah, it was raining, and so I put the newspaper over my head. I forgot my umbrella, and I didn't want to go walk over the overpass. And then I heard the whistle and the light. I was walking right into a train. This guy, he pulled me back.
Look, listen, and live, or someone you love will get hurt.
I just almost died.
Joining me now is former Boston College and NHL player Ken Hodge. Ken was drafted by the Minnesota North Stars in the 1984 draft. Ken played with the North Stars as well as the Boston Bruins before retiring with Tampa Bay. Welcome to the show, Ken. Thank you so much for coming.
Thanks for having me, Diane.
Ken is joined by his attorney, Kenneth Lakin. Ken is a partner in the law firm Broadhurst, Lakin & Lakin, and is a professor at the Massachusetts School of Law, where he teaches sports and entertainment law. He has represented a number of professional athletes over the years. Ken, great to see you again.
Diane, always a pleasure to see you.
Welcome to the show. Ken, let's start with you. How has the game of hockey changed in the past 2 decades? Has it become a game of speed and strength as opposed to skill?
Well, the easiest answer to that one would be the money, I think, is the biggest change.
It's changed to a game of money, yeah?
You know, you go back to the era of the 70s when my dad played, they only made maybe $25,000 to $50,000 per season, which was big money back then. Yeah. Then when I went in the 90s, it was, you know, guys were making $1 million, which was probably, you know, the top end guy, and then after that, it's been, you know, if you don't make more than $1 million as a low end guy, then there's something seriously wrong. But
wow.
You can also look at the size of some of these guys. Some 6'4" guys is the average size, and size, strength, and speed is a big attribute for for playing hockey now.
Big part of the game today.
It absolutely is, and that's, if you don't have that size and speed, you're not going to play.
Wow. Ken, is it the lawyer, is it the agent, is it the representative of the player that's responsible for this escalating salary problem?
I'm often asked that question, both not only the NHL but in the NFL, as I've represented a number of NFL players over the years. You know, there's a lot of factors that get involved with it. You know, you look at an article was done by the Wall Street Journal a couple of weeks ago on the problems that the NHL is having, and there's been an increase in overall revenues in the league between 1993 and 2003 of 163%. So money's not been a problem. Commissioner Getman's done a great job of bringing the league out of licensing and advertising the league at different levels. The problem's been that a number of teams have spent money stupidly or unnecessarily, and that's created a quagmire. Obviously, the TV revenues has composed to the other sports is a significant issue that the NHL has to face. But players and their agents and their lawyers who represent them are out to get them what they can get them. And if a team's going to pay them money for that, and their services there, it's a free market system. They're entitled to get that. That's the foundation of the whole country as a capitalist.
But does it become a situation of personal greed over really the security of the league?
No, I wouldn't classify it as greed. It's not greed. There's revenues that are there, and each team's different. You take teams like Ottawa and Buffalo and Atlanta that have had significant. The first two were in bankruptcy, significant issues. But the other teams like the Rangers and other big market teams have done very, very well. It's up to the individual owner and their management team and the player and the agent involved to get the value for that player. And if the player is going to draw in people in that particular location in that particular team, then that person should be rightly compensated for it. It's not the role of the player or the agent or the lawyer to be into the management game for different cities and different teams. That's their responsibility.
Is the violence and the aggressiveness an essential part?
Well, I think it is, because you have to have some kind of fear factor in hockey, and you hate to use those words, but when you're not intimidating somebody, maybe that's a better terminology, then they're going to have the upper hand on you, and that's kind of what hockey is. It's an intimidation game. I've seen recently. I hate to keep going back to the early '70s and '60s, but they'd have bench clearing brawls on a night in and night out basis. Now, I think you can count on one finger the number of times in the last 10 years that there's been a bench clearing brawl. They've tried to cut that out of the game, which I think is a good thing, but yet there's still the intimidation factor. There's still these, again, 6'4" guys. You know, you're going to lay a body check on a 6-foot guy, it's going to be intimidating. And then all of a sudden you have to drop the gloves, and now all of a sudden here you go, and now you got to fight these guys. And you have to have some type of intimidation to be able to play this game.
The viewers love the fights, though.
Well, they do, and I think some of the bigger players like Mario Lemieux and Wayne Gretzky, when they were prominent in the league, were trying to cut it out because I think the league went through a period of where a team would win games 1-0, 2-1, and the fans weren't as into the hockey game as they are now when you see some more goals. So the big guys, the bigger named guys like Lemieux and Gretzky and even Brett Hull to an extent, advocated to get fighting out of the game. And that's exactly what happened for a little while, but it's slowly creeping its way back in.
Why isn't, in your opinion, hockey as popular as other major league sports? I mean, I read reports that say, well, the viewers find it hard to follow on TV, or the fact that it is low scoring is problematic for people's interests.
I think there's two factors. I think one is the speed of the game on TV. It doesn't come across as if you were actually at a game and see how fast these guys are actually skating. And I think also, too, the second thing was when they came in with helmets, you don't get to see the guy's face as much. Now the guys wear face shields. Some guys wear, full face cages when they're injured, obviously. So you don't really get to see the player and identify with that player. And when that player is in one city, he may not be there for more than a year, and all of a sudden he's playing somebody somewhere else. So that's another part of the name and face recognition that you don't have anymore as much as you had back in the early 70s.
Right.
I think another issue along those lines also is that hockey, unlike some of the other main sports, is kind of a regional sport. The Northeast and the Midwest in particular, you get out to the West and the Southwest and the South, it's not nearly as popular.
But isn't it interesting the teams are expanding down there? I mean, you played in Tampa Bay.
Right. They were trying to get into a different market. I think hockey was trying to grab some different places and try to get some different, establish some roots. When I was in Tampa Bay, I mean, we had 15,000 seat building we were at, and it was the first year of the team. They'd maybe have maybe 5,000 fans were cheering for us,
wow.
and 10,000 fans were cheering for the other team that was coming in. If you think about it, you got
wow.
a lot of Canadians,
sure.
a lot of northern people go down to Canada, or down to Tampa rather, and spend their winters down there.
Sure.
They're not rooting for the Lightning. They could care less about the Lightning.
And so they can't get tickets up north, so they're going to see their favorite teams.
You see what happens with the Red Sox and the Red Sox,
yeah.
the Yankees play down, and the same thing happens.
Yeah.
I don't try to diss Tampa Bay. My brother John lives down in Tampa Bay. I've never tried to diss his area. But basically what's happening is the larger market teams, not only in the NHL, but in a lot of other sports as well, is that these large markets are subsidizing these teams that maybe should not have a pro team. Maybe they should have a AAA team or a minor league, but not a pro team, because that cuts into the overall revenue issues that we addressed earlier. Right. When you're supporting a Nashville, or Tampa Bay, these areas are Columbus that are, arguably not major market areas that should have major pro teams, and it's to some extent indirectly siphoning some of the revenues of the overall NHL coffers, and I think that's an issue. I really do. I think the NHL has to address that issue.
I wonder, in light of what Ken just said about unless you're really at the game, you don't appreciate all of the skill and the beauty of the game unless you're there because it's lost on TV. But how does one go when tickets are $70, $90? How do you take your two kids in to see the Boston Bruins?
Got to have good friends that have a lot of tickets.
Oh, does he have tickets?
Well, it's funny. My firm had season tickets for a number of years. We couldn't give them away to clients. So we don't have season tickets anymore, because if I need to send a client to a particular game, I could just go buy 2 tickets and send them to the game. I think the issue, that's a quagmire. The increase in NHL tickets has been 81% in the last 10 years. And they've optimized their growth level at this point, and that's going to be a significant issue that they're going to have to deal with heading into the collective bargaining agreement, which is going to be September of 2004. But an issue of getting a family, a husband and a wife and 2 children, it's a significant cost factor, and they're going to have to address those issues.
I think also too, and I don't mean to interrupt you, Diana, but the ticket is $75, but that just gets you into your seat.
You're right. Good point.
You're looking at, you got to pay $20 or $25 to park your car down the Fleet Center now, and that's in the lower garage where you might not even get a spot down there. First off. And then when you get into the building, now you're going to pay $5 for a hot dog, $5 for a soda. By an average family of 4, by the time they get to the hockey game, it's $500 to get home. I mean,
and they can't do that.
You can't. I mean, especially with the economics the way they are nowadays, you just can't afford to take a family on a consistent basis on an 82-game season. There's 41 home dates. You can barely go once or twice a season to go to a game and spend $1,000.
Right. And hockey, unlike Major League Baseball, unlike football, unlike most of the other sports, heavily dependent, from the numbers I've looked at that gate or that ticket income to pay their biggest expense, which is in fact player salaries. So what's the Hockey League going to do to attract more sponsorship or more TV contracts or do something to bring down the ticket price?
Well, I think that there's a couple of issues there. When you look at how hockey has to draw, I personally think they have to downsize the league. I think it's just too big of a league. I think they want to expand to 4 more teams.
I know.
I think that's a mistake. The number of teams they have is enough. I think they need to minimize the markets in terms of having a couple of large markets and strong geographical areas, and then and try to therefore then cut down some of the ticket prices across the board. I think they need to do a much more better job in marketing, doing merchandising, licensing rights, and things of that nature. Like the NFL, if you look at the NFL Players Association, they've done a tremendous job on that. The NFL in general has done a tremendous job of attracting a new market of people. Maybe going overseas into the European markets and the Asian markets and doing things like that in order to attract more money to bring it into the league. But I think the way that the league is structured now, and given that the TV content is laughable. Bowling has more people than hockey does.
Don't tell me that.
So it's really something that they need to say that they can't get to the level of an NFL or the NBA, and they need to then address that issue on the TV contract where they can get a more wide-based audience, potentially, like I say, overseas and other markets, and downsize the size of the league and make it more competitive and make it more revenue generating in larger markets. I think that's the focus that they have to think about.
I happened to be playing at the time when Gary Bettman became the commissioner. He came in from the NBA, and the NBA was just at its height of its popularity when you said Bird and Magic and all those guys were coming into the height of their popularity. Well, he said, let's do the same thing. Let's try to take that model of the NBA and let's bring it over to the NHL. Doesn't work because, as you mentioned before, they got the helmets and they don't have the name recognition, and the guys are constantly moving back and forth. That's hockey's got to kind of do its own thing and not worry about the NBA, the NFL, right, or the Major League Baseball. They got to start worrying about themselves.
You know why I wanted to do this show? In part, my nephews play hockey, so I've been taking them to the college games, and I've really come to appreciate the athleticism of hockey players. I mean, I was shocked, but really, I think they're just the most talented of athletes and get little credit for that. But then the intellectual question for me that I'm going to ask you became, hockey players are known as being aggressive, violent. People don't want their kids to play hockey. We're not going to have these kids become animals, et cetera, et cetera. Then I started to think about it. I have not heard of a hockey player getting in trouble with the law for raping or domestic violence or knives or guns. You don't hear about that. Why?
Well, I think that when you're on the ice and happen to be playing, you're going for the testosterone's there when you're on the ice. But when you get off the ice, all of a sudden now, if it's Kenny and I playing, he's on a different team than me. We're beating each other's brains out. But after the game, it's almost like we'll go to the bar or whatever and have a drink together or have a bite to eat and sit down and talk to each other like we're normal people. And I think that's the difference between our sport and everybody else. We're just normal people, and I think hockey being the fourth on the totem pole almost equates us with the average Joe.
You don't get the big money either that some of the other sports.
Exactly.
The contracts had as much. Part of an issue that I have is a perception out there of sports and athletes getting in trouble, and I really have an issue with that because if you look at the numbers of athletes that are in all the 4 leagues and on a per capita or percentage basis are actually charged with a crime and a lot of stuff because they're well-known people will be pulled over or someone will make an allegation against. In general, it's a very small fraction of the amount of professional players. The overwhelming majority of players that I've seen or represented over the years and dealt with over the years do a lot of charity events, help kids out, do cancer work and all kinds of, but that doesn't sell well on the front page of the Globe. Being pulled over for drunk driving does. So it's more the negative view, but that negative view of actually people judged is a very small percentage overall of professional athletes. It really is.
Is hockey accessible to kids? Do kids love it? How do we attract children to hockey?
Well, that's a very good question because hockey right now I think is going on the downward side. And the reason why I say that is because there's other options right now. Lacrosse is now becoming very, very popular. Soccer is now becoming extremely popular. Now all of a sudden you got 3 different options. You have to charge it on to the parents. And I don't know how Lexington is, but you're paying $1,500 for half of the season, or maybe even more money. That's getting kind of expensive.
There's no question about that. I think that's part of the problem of attracting It's true, there are a lot of other sports that are out there, but the cost factor for hockey is significant. I know by bringing my son Kyle last week to get a face mask, a helmet, and a pair of pants for his hockey, was $180.
Yeah.
So I think there's a scare factor for the cost factor, as well as the perception of violence. But it's a great sport, and it's well disciplined. The dedication of both the NHL players and the coaching level at all levels, starting down at the squirts, peewees, and all the way through, and up to the college level and high school and college levels, is tremendous. And I think those coaches should be credited for that. It's a great game, but I'd caution people to let their son or their daughter look into the sport and be fair about it before you make any prejudgments. Don't just rush to judgment, as us lawyers like to say.
But you got to be willing as the parent to get up at 4 in the morning and 5 in the morning, because that's when they play these games.
It's unbelievable. I can give you one quick story. Last year, this tells you the difference between the commitment, and because of, like Ken mentioned, the lack of ice time, that my son had an indoor soccer game on a Friday night that was going to go from 9 to like 10 o'clock. And before the snowstorm that was coming even started, the soccer coach had emailed saying that it would be canceled. But we had a hockey game the next morning at 6 o'clock in the morning at a rink in another part of town, where the hockey coach emailed us at 9 that night when the storm already started, the snowstorm, and said under no conditions will we ever cancel.
No, they don't. They don't.
So I went on the highway, drove my son there, almost got in a car accident. When I got to the rink, driving through all the snow, every single parent was there with their children. So it epitomizes the commitment level that you do have in hockey.
Okay, we're a year away almost from 2004. But what's going to happen? Are we going to have a lockout? Are we going to have a strike? And if we do, can the league sustain it?
I think that we are going to have a strike. I don't think the league is going to be able to sustain it. I think you're going to see 6 teams going to be gone, and you don't just talk about the 6 franchises losing, but how about all the players that are going to lose their jobs as well? It's going to be 120 jobs, because I'm just basing that on 20 guys per team. There's probably more, because if you think they got a minor league system,
Sure.
they got a minor league system on top of that, so you're probably looking at about maybe 360 guys that are going to be without a job, and maybe that's good for the league in the long run, but in the short term, it's not going to be very good for the league, and I think you're going to lose a lot of fan support.
I think it's going to be very difficult. And the NHL already has approximately $300 million in their coffers, anticipating a work stoppage. The union's been pretty aggressive in their wording in terms of where they think they want to be with an open free market and don't want a salary cap. I've dealt with the NFL salary cap for many, many years. I don't even like to refer to it as a cap, because it really isn't a cap. It's what we call a soft cap. There's many, many ways of getting around the NFL. I believe the teams love to use it as an excuse to get rid of players, but there's all kinds of ways around it. But the union for the NHL has been pretty strict about where they want to be with this, and they don't want to have any type of even modified cap, from what I understand. Right. So I think there's going to be an issue. There's going to be a flush out. I'd be very surprised if there isn't going to be a work stoppage, but it's not going to be pretty, I don't think.
Thank you for spending this time with us this afternoon. Ken?
Diane, always good to see you. Always a pleasure.
Okay, say hello to the family. Good to see you.
Will. Thank you.
Thanks, Diane.
How far would you go to help someone? Would you go to the end of your driveway? Would you cross a street? Would you cross an ocean? To a place 6,000 miles from home? And how long would you go? Would you go for a week? A month? A year? Would you go for 2 years? Would you go if you could use your knowledge to teach someone, and in the process, maybe learn something yourself? Life is calling. How far will you go? Peace Corps.
Exercise your emotions. Attend a live orchestra concert. Go to findaconcert.com.
This is Bev. She has breast cancer. This is Caroline. She's had breast cancer.
I remember that.
This is Reach to Recovery.
Hi, Daddy.
A program where breast cancer survivors help women facing breast cancer find courage and inspiration.
It is. And it's real. It's nice to hear you laugh.
This is the American Cancer Society. This is who to call for help.
Good getting out.
Joining me now is hockey writer Jack Fowler. Jack is the author of a number of hockey books, including Sports Illustrated Hockey, Home Ice, and Quest for the Cup. He is a freelance sports writer and a professor of sports journalism at Boston University. Jack, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Delighted you could make it.
Always like to talk hockey.
Jack, tell us about this looming lockout. What's going to happen?
My father once told me that and if there's ever a question in sport that you don't completely understand, the answer will turn out to be power or money. And in this case, it's both. With a little admixture of pride. You know how in any battle between management and labor, pride is the enemy of both? Yeah. Well, this is what we're saying. On the player side, the union is saying, let a free market set salaries. No one's pointing a gun at owners' heads to pay these salaries. On the other side, management is saying, we spend 76% of our revenue toward player salaries versus 40-something in the other sports. We can't go on that way. We need cost, the buzzword is cost certainty. Cost certainty, if you're a player, what you hear when they say cost certainty is salary cap. And right now, there's just no give either way, and it all could go dark on September 15th, 2004.
I grew up believing that hockey players were violent, aggressive, really the bad boys of athletics. Not true. When do you hear about a hockey player getting in trouble today with the law? You don't hear it.
Rarely, except well, Danny Heatley putting his Ferrari into a fence, and unfortunately, a teammate died in 6 days after that accident. And that's an awful thing, but it's rare. It's very rare. There's a saying I think started in the Orient, but it applies to Canada and it applies to the hockey culture, and that is that the pointed nail gets hammered down. It's hard to big league it in an NHL dressing, in any hockey dressing room, Pee-wees on up. If you have any kind of a physical characteristic that stands out, a scar, a receding hairline, ears, nose, anything, players will go right for that and in a good-natured way start making fun of you. Players police themselves. A woman reporter told me, this was years ago after the Patriots had had an episode of sexual harassment of a Boston Herald writer.
Right.
Another, not that writer, another writer, and it was a Boston area writer, told me that if that had happened to her in hockey, that Raymond Bourque, the captain of the Boston Bruins, just would have pulled that player aside and said, we don't do that, that's the last time it happens, or someone else would have done it. That hockey players police themselves.
They're really decent guys.
And the funny thing is, and it's known throughout the hockey culture, and I don't think it's known beyond the hockey culture, the goons, the enforcers, the designated fighters throughout the league are almost without exception the guys who do the most in community service. They go to the most hospitals, they work with the most charities, they give more of themselves to the community than almost anyone.
You brought up the fighting. Is that essential to the game?
No. The NHL has been asking itself the wrong question for a long time. They say, well, do fans like fighting? Well, they do, because if you're in the arena and a fight breaks out, you look around and everybody's standing up and cheering. The question I would like the answer to is, who are you turning off by fighting, and what are the demographics of that group? You know, it would take a few $100,000 worth of research, I mean, to really do this right. But I would like to know who are you driving away, not just who's coming into the tent. And there's just no way to know that right now. Although in college hockey you don't have fighting, and you have some pretty good crowds, at least for the tournament. But the two businesses aren't really comparable. The NHL governors, the owners, could ban fighting before we finish this show if they wanted to. Just say you fight, you're suspended for 5 games, 2 fights, 10 games, and so on. They're not about to do that. There is an element out there that likes it. It's also tactically part of the game. Scotty Bowman, the retired coach, 8-time Stanley Cup winner, I think it was retired coach of Detroit, Montreal, Buffalo, told me one time that the role of the fighter is to make the skill player feel, and it's a Scotty's word, comfortable. So I guess I'm a little guy. You know, I'd feel more comfortable, yeah, if somebody was watching my back. And this is the function. This is how it works. So even though you have in Toronto a president of a team, Ken Dryden, who wrote one of the best books ever in the game, and went on pages and pages why fighting should be taken out of the game. He employs Ty Domi, who's one of the tougher guys in the league and has been for a long time, not because he wants to, I don't think, because you cannot put a team out there with a couple of guys to protect your stars. Yeah. And as long as that exists, you will see fighting in hockey.
Mm-hmm. Makes sense.
Although it's gone down. Fighting has gone down.
Yes, it has.
And the culture's funny. It has its own rules. Goons fight goons for the most part.
Mm-hmm.
The only time that the fighter will go after a small guy after this small guy's cheap shot at a star or something like that. It's we should write the rules up sometimes. They're sort of unwritten code right now, but everybody knows them.
Yeah.
And everybody knows when you violate one.
Except the fans.
Well, new fans. You know,
Yeah,
the
new
old
fans,
fans such as I know them.
If you were running the league, what changes would you make going forward to solve the labor and the financial issues?
Well, changes besides my Learjet. If I were running the league, I would consider, and they won't do this, I would consider contraction. I'm not sure. Tampa Bay did well last year. They might do well this year because the team won. I'm not really convinced that that's a fabulous hockey market down there in Tampa Bay. I'm not convinced Wayne Gretzky's new stadium out in, I like Wayne, I wish him well. They're opening a new stadium far out of town. I'm not sure that's the solution to anything. I don't know if that national footprint strategy to me did not work.
Right.
And it might be time to pull it back to 21 teams or 26 teams. Now you say, well, who has to go? Maybe then we let the market decide a little bit. I think that I would probably also take the posture of the current administration that, yeah, we've got to do something. We've got to do something about containing our costs. Now, I see Bobby Goodenow, the head of the union. I absolutely see his point. No one is making the owners pay this money, and as soon as some teams start to fold, maybe the natural market forces will reduce this. But I don't think that is likely to happen anytime soon. There's too many big egos that think they can spend their way to the Stanley Cup, and the team that won the Stanley Cup last year is a middle of the road payroll, the New Jersey Devils. I think they did it with a payroll around $40 million, half of what the New York Rangers had. So that's not entirely valid. But I think I would also be looking for some sort of cost certainty. I might lean more toward the luxury tax, which would help my small market teams.
Sure.
If you're going to keep all those teams in their place and let them live or die naturally based on market forces, the luxury tax might produce some revenue that would help those teams.
Do you believe that hockey players are becoming, quote, too greedy? Are they seeking as much, income as they can at the expense of the league?
I don't think anyone's too greedy. I think people get what someone else is willing to pay you. And in sports, that is based on, it's based as it is in the financial markets and how much you make for someone else, how much you make for your owner. And almost every time an economist has put a pencil or a calculator to this, they've come up with the answer that no one wants to hear. That yes, unless a player gets hurt, a star player making a lot of money, they actually are worth the money when you factor in the increased attendance, playoff income, and television and radio rights that might go up as a result of a team doing well. It's entirely possible that in many cases, people who are making a lot of money are in fact making even more money for the ownership. Of course, an owner will never tell you that, of course. This is a great charitable gesture. Now, it's hard to blame the players.
Yeah.
I blame the owners. I blame the owners because no one made them do it. And now they've got to come up with some kind of a way to police themselves.
Right, to handle the escalating salary. Yeah.
So No, if I'm a player, I get what I can get. I get what my agent can get me.
Different question. Comment on the diversity now in the league. You got players from all over the world.
You do. But still, the league is still about 60% Canadian. And I appreciate the skill of a Jaromir Jagr and Fedorov and a lot of these, and Hasek and the Czechoslovakian, Russia, and Eastern European players, the Scandinavian players. I find some of the names hard to pronounce. They don't exactly roll off the tongue. I find some of the interviews very formulaic, and if I had to do an interview in another language, I'm sure I'd play it safe too. I somehow find these athletes as people less interesting than I found a Wayne Gretzky, a Bobby Orr, a Ray Bourque, a Gordie Howe, a Rocket Richard, a Jean Beliveau, the people of my era. But they're wonderfully skilled players, and the name of the game is winning the cup. That's what puts people in the seats. I don't know how much more diversity there might be. I have a feeling that the tide might be going the other way. The best juniors teams are still in Canada. You see some foreign players coming over to play junior, but you also see some Americans going up to Canada to play junior, and you see junior hockey, junior A hockey, which is still the #1 springboard to the National Hockey League, coming down into the States. In Lewiston, Maine, because of the huge Francophone population, the Quebec Major Junior League just put its first team in New England, the Maniacs, down in. They've sold out their first few games. I don't know if that will continue, but you're seeing the spread of junior hockey, and you're seeing some college players leave college to play junior hockey because they feel that's one step closer to the NHL. So I think there will always be a majority of North Americans at least, let's say North Americans at least, and possibly and probably Canadians, making up the National Hockey League.
Final comments for the audience, Jack?
Keep your head up coming through the neutral zone. Yeah, you better start falling in love with your local AHL team or your local high school team, your local college team, because there's a good chance. Now, I hope that reason will prevail here, and I've heard that while Bobby Goodenough and the players and Gary Bettman from the league have not met face to face in quite a while, as we tape this show, which is early in the season, that their teams, their seconds, have met, and that some progress is beginning to be made. I think there'll be a trade. I think there'll be a give back type of situation. If the league does get a soft cap or a luxury tax, I think the players will say, okay, we'll let you have it, but now free agency is going to move down from age 31 to 28 or something like that. And they'll do something to free the players up a little more than they are now. So the lockout, if there is one, I think it'll be short. I think maybe December or January. That's my take.
And the league can survive that?
Yeah, the league, they did before. They can survive that. If they go dark, there's another pro league, the WHA, which seems to be the gang that couldn't shoot straight right now, but they are nevertheless standing by, trying to raise capital, trying to raise money, trying to establish franchises so that they can move into the vacuum. Whether they can do that or not, I don't know. It'll be interesting to watch them try. But I think if a business folds for a season and a half, 2 seasons, they're going to have a very hard time starting up again.
Sure.
And that, there is no Gretzky out there now. There is Lemieux is probably going to pack it in after this year. There's no superstar of that stature out there anymore. There are superstars, sure, but not like those guys.
Right.
Not somebody that can take you to the bank.
Right, and that's what the league needs.
Bankable superstars, yeah.
Jack, thank you so much for talking with us today. You've been invaluable with your insight.
Pleasure, a lot of fun. Love talking hockey, and I hope I'll have something to talk about in the future.
Yeah, I hope you will too. Come back and see us, Jack. Thanks.
This is Alan. He has cancer. This is Sarah. They've been together 46 years.
Way to go, sweetheart. Now go get it.
This is the number they called when he was diagnosed, so they could get answers to their questions,
Kiss that ball.
so they could get through this together. This is the American Cancer Society. This is who to call for help.
I love you.
Every year in our country, almost 14,000 women die from ovarian cancer.
It doesn't have to be that way. When detected early, ovarian cancer is usually treatable.
Unfortunately, in its early stages, it often shows few symptoms, and these symptoms can sometimes be misinterpreted as something else.
Ovarian cancer is a serious health risk for women at any age, but it can be beaten. We know.
Because we're beating it.
Joining me now from the Sports Museum here at the Fleet Center in Boston, Massachusetts is Richard Johnson. He's fondly known as the soul man of Boston sports. Dick, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much.
Tell us a little bit about the Sports Museum and your role here as curator.
Well, the Sports Museum is located at the Fleet Center in Boston on the 5th and 6th floors. And we include in our exhibits about 2,300 artifacts, interactive displays, film, videotape, really a smorgasbord of the sports history of the region.
Just a grand place. Dick, did you have a favorite hockey team or a favorite hockey player when you were a kid growing up?
Well, the Bruins of the Bobby Orr, Phil Esposito era were as charismatic a group that have ever played any sport in any league. They were just, you know, the team, and that was the team of my youth and the team that made me a big hockey fan.
Great. Let's look at the evolution of the game. Tell us a little bit how it began as the original six and take us up to current.
Well, it was interesting that hockey had deep roots in the New England area long before the start of the National Hockey League. You had hockey being played at St. Paul's School in Concord, New Hampshire in the 1890s. The collegiate hockey leagues started pretty soon after that, so I believe Harvard's program started also in the 1890s. So the sport really is, I think, the one closest to our hearts here, because there have been more professionals that have come from the New England area in hockey than in any other sport. And then certainly the great number of Olympic players, the great high school tradition here. This is also the home of the first interscholastic hockey league in the country, dating back to the 19-teens. And the Boston Arena, now known as Matthews Arena, is the oldest indoor ice arena in the world.
Wow,
and that's still here. That's where the Bruins started back in 1924. So the origins of hockey in this area go back to the origins of the sport itself.
It helps get us through these New England winters. I think that's why we love it so much.
Yes.
Dick, different question. Is the violence or the fights of the game essential to people being attracted to watching hockey?
No, I don't think so, because in collegiate hockey, fighting is punished with a game suspension. So that anyone that's watched top-level collegiate hockey knows that it's as good as it gets. And you don't need the fighting, it's a distraction. But that being said, certain teams had as part of their identity a fighting mode to them. Certainly the Bruins had that for a number of years. You know, they were a tough team, they were a team to be contended with at all times. And the fighting was almost a part of the script. The Flyers of the early 70s sort of took a page out of the Bruins book and tried to intimidate opponents as well as outplay them. But that being said, I think anyone that's watched enough hockey knows that when it's played well, it's a beautiful sport, and the fighting tends to delay it. It tends to be a distraction. And in this day and age, there are not many teams that can really intimidate you anymore. The game has changed a bit. It's a more flowing sport, and skating skill and overall talent really are what you pay to see. You don't pay to see a couple of goons out there slugging it out.
Hockey players are great athletes.
Yes.
Why haven't hockey salaries escalated like other sports salaries?
Well, hockey, professional hockey, the National Hockey League in particular, just does not receive the television income that the other major sports, you know, we really think of there being as four major sports in North America. The National Football League has the biggest TV contract. They also have the most players to pay, but you know, they're paid on an average higher than the National Hockey League players. The NBA has a larger TV contract, Major League Baseball. There's certain individual clubs in MLB that get paid an enormous amount, teams such as the Yankees. So the National Hockey League has always been the fourth of the four major sports in terms of pay, just because the money's not there. The money has to derive from ticket income, and you can only charge so much.
And is it accurate to say that much of the gate income, as I call it, the ticket income, is paid out, in fact, for salaries? That's where they spend the bulk of the money.
Well, they claim that nearly 75% of player salary comes from ticket income, and I believe it. And the fact is that certain teams charge an extraordinary amount. I was at a game in Toronto 2 years ago, and the price for individual tickets in the loge, good seats but not great seats, was $162.50 a piece. Now that's Canadian, but still, that would be about $110 American currency for one hockey game, and this was against the Nashville Predators, not exactly a classic contest. So that's what they're up against, and the league is really at the point now where I can't imagine them possibly increasing prices any more than they have.
I mean, how can you afford to go? The average person, tough to do.
Average person can't, but in the markets where the game is supreme, Toronto being one of them, they can charge it and they can get it.
Let me ask a different question. Why do you think hockey is not as popular throughout the nation as other sports? Is it that it's low scoring or hard to follow on television, or is there some other reason?
Well, I think the popularity of any sport is based on whether or not kids have played it, so that in most of the country, kids have just never put the skates on and gone out and played hockey. It's as simple as that. The other factor that really has an impact on the game not being as popular as the other sports, it's so expensive.
Yeah.
Just to outfit a squirt player, you're spending upwards of $400 or $500.
Dick, thank you so much for joining us here today.
Thank you.
Integrity first. Service before self. Excellence in all we do. These are not just words. These are our core values. Values by which each and every member of the Air Force Reserve lives. So whether we are deploying humanitarian aid, or providing natural disaster relief, or defending freedom wherever it's threatened, the men and women of the Air Force Reserve are there, protecting our values and serving our country. Air Force Reserve, above and beyond.